Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LCK week number 3 overview and analysis video in the spring split. Once again, coming out at the end of Wednesday night. I do apologize, this video coming out a day later than I would like. Life has just been very chaotic as of late. I appreciate the patience, but we are back here for the LCK, and we are going to be covering everything here in week number 3 as we normally do. Some upsets this week to talk about. We don't always get those in the LCK, so definitely some exciting things on the horizon. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. As per usual, let me know what you thought of this week. Who impressed you? Who didn't impress you? What players are really standing out in a positive and negative way for you? What do you feel about my power rankings at the end of the video? All of that, I would really love to hear down in the comment section below, but let's go ahead and get into the video. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will, of course, as I said before, be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 10 at the end of the week, kind of talking about where I think these teams are headed direction-wise, but for the most part today, we are going to talk about the series we got in week 3, so without further ado, let's get into the content itself, shall we? And kicking off, of course, the content here for week number 3 is day number 1. Funny how that ends up working out, but in day number 1, we got a really fun matchup to kick things off between T1 and NS RedForce, two teams with scarily similar color schemes, and T1 is going to be able to come out on top of this matchup in a 2-1 series win. No surprise, no upset here, but honestly, I'm not shocked by anything in this series. T1 was better, and they certainly performed like it, but NS definitely gave them a run for their money, and this is a really good NS RedForce team, and they're making a decision. They're finally moving on to a player that I'm really interested in the mid lane that I think could be a potential big upgrade for them, and quite frankly, he was in this series. As you can see, Fisher has been benched for KALX in the mid lane, and KALX is a player that I'm sure if you followed the channel, you kind of know. I'm very excited about KALX. This is a guy who I think has the mechanics to be pretty decent at this level. Honestly, as a prospect, reminds me a ton of what I thought of Bulldog coming into the LCK. Now, obviously, Bulldog has not turned out particularly great, but I do think this is the kind of player that can be immediately effective for a team that really just needs stable mid lane play because they have a lot of talent elsewhere, and they got it out of KALX. He was the best player on the Rift in this series for NS. You know, I think that's debatable with Lehens, who obviously was super active, but, you know, he was pretty good in this series, and T1 just won in spite of that. It wasn't KALX's fault that he came in and lost his first series, but let's go ahead and talk about a player of the series for me. Is going to go to Owner. I honestly did not have to think about this one really at all. Broadcast ended up giving this to Faker. I love how Faker played these games. He was not on my radar for player of the series. I would have given it to Owner first and foremost, and then maybe even someone like Doran. Obviously, he really struggled at the beginning of this series in game number 2 in particular on the Gnar, but that Sion game was super clutch in game number 3, and I thought he played well. Faker obviously was really good, but Owner was definitely the star for T1 in this series, not only in terms of the setup that he had in game 1, and even really in game 2, where I thought he played great on the Sejuani. They just, you know, NS had a good plan and were able to execute on it around the Galio and the Xin Zhao being able to take a ton of these trades. Lehens was on Elise, and he's like one of the only players in the world that I'll even give kind of a pass to that champion, but it's really the Viego game in game number 3 that solidified the player of the series for me when it came to Owner. I feel like I've been guilty at times of talking about him as if he's not one of the best junglers in the world, and, you know, I understand that I can be a bit lower on him individually as a player, but by lower on him, I mean, like, he's a top 4 or a top 5 jungler in the world. He's probably not top 1. That being said, like, junglers are really freaking good right now globally. You're talking about, you know, even just in the LCK, players like Peanut, you're talking about players like Canyon, and then Owner is right up there, I think, in my opinion. You know, I would probably put him number 2, right below Peanut, but you guys know I'm a really big fan of Peanut. And that doesn't even mention Lucid, who I think is also obviously really good. He's really breaking out this year. He's one of the top tier junglers in the world. But then you move over to the LPL. I think guys like Tarzan and Kanavi have to be in that conversation as well. There's just a lot of good junglers in the world right now. Owner is definitely amongst the best. And, you know, where I specifically place him, it kind of depends on the form that every jungler is in. But I don't want it to seem like I'm an Owner hater. Not anymore, at the very least. I certainly was last year, and I certainly have been in this channel's history. But I don't think that that accurately applies to what I think of Owner anymore as a player. This Viego was great. The Sejuani was great. He's been nothing but good for T1 throughout this entire year. Doran was really struggling on these carry picks in games 1 and 2. Game 1 was fine, but game 2 was a little bit rough for him on the Gnar. Doran definitely is not the player that can come in and do what Zeus did for this team, and the moment they've started figuring that out and moving towards Sion or anything really weak side on the top side, things have really started to stabilize for T1 in the back half of these games. He's really, really good in that role. And I think the more they allow him to really unlock that part of him, the better things are going to get. KINGYON couldn't do anything in game number 3 on the Gangplank, and a lot of that was because of Doran on the Scion. Faker was obviously really excellent here. KALX put up a great fight, and I do think he had a great series. Again, we'll talk about KALX on the other side because I was really impressed with his individual gameplay, but the Taliyah and the Victor from Faker were exceptional. The Victor in those team fights is just unreal good. The LCK plays Victor better than anybody in the world. Not that that should surprise anybody. Smash and KIA continue to look very good as a bot lane duo. Smash definitely feels more comfortable on these hyper carries, and one thing that I do want to point out that I think is relevant to the Smash versus Gumayushi debate is that Guma is better on the champions that I think are more meta viable right now, specifically things like Jhin and Ashe. I think those are definitely things that Smash is not quite as comfortable on, but you get him on Zeri and Jinx and he's going to feel at home. He's a great hyper carry player. He knows how to do damage. He knows how to team fight, but KIA can really set up anything. The Tahm Kenshin game number 3 was especially fun, but T1 in general is just a good team. Nongshim put up a good fight, but T1 came out on top. And for Nongshim, it's kind of frustrating to try to point out a weakness for this team because everything is fine for them. It's just not quite there in order for them to break through into that upper echelon, that top 4 or anything like that. First off, KALX was insane. I think his scoreline absolutely does him justice. This was one of those mid lane performances where it's like, I hope Fisher never comes back in because even Fisher's best games didn't showcase that this was possible, and it's just really nice to see. I do believe that a change in the mid lane could unlock things for Nongshim. There's still really only one slip up from a top team away from making Worlds. You need to be capitalizing on this year as much as possible, and I think they did that here. I also do want to point out Gideon, who, while he wasn't great throughout the back half of this series, specifically in Game 3 on the Nocturne, was good in Game 2 on the Xin Zhao. Outside of that, there are some ups and downs. Jiwoo is actually going to get my dud of the series. I don't think this is going to be a very popular decision. I'm sure some people are going to argue with it down in the comments section, but I just don't. I think he left a lot of meat on the bones. That's the way I kind of want to word this, where I get that the scoreline is good, the KDA is good, and he did do a lot of damage, but you watch him in these team fights, and man, he could have been doing just a little bit more. I think if this team had an elite AD carry, you absolutely would notice the difference, and right now, Jiwoo is good, and I do think he's been better in spring than he was in winter. It's just not quite good enough to be able to eclipse the upper tier teams. Lehens was good, but also very greedy. Once again, I'm never going to be a fan of the Elise pick, but if anyone in the world is going to pick it, it should be Lehens. He's the perfect Elise player. KINGYON also kind of got bounced on the top side in Game 3. That was not a good look. KINGYON's been really good across this year, so that was really not ideal, but at the end of the day, Nongshim lost to one of the best teams in the LCK. They're still sitting at 3-2. This is a very good team. They're just not quite top 4, and T1 is top 4 regardless of some of their slip-ups. This team just needs to get more consistent. Right now, they've yet to find their groove. I think the roster changes and the drama in general surrounding the team have had a lot to do with that, but I still think there's a lot of ways to go here. Then moving on to the second series of day number 1 here, and a predictable result, but certainly not a predictable way to get there. It was BNK FearX taking on Gen.G, and Gen.G is going to pick up the 2-1 series win, and yes, Gen.G is walking out of this with a victory, but BFX took a game off of what is currently the best team in the LCK. It's pretty cool to see where BNK has gone across the last couple of weeks. They went from easily the worst team in the LCK in winter. We had them projected as such, going into the year, and then, they turn out to be even worse than I think I could have anticipated, to coming out here in spring with no roster changes and just kind of figuring it out and being a lot more versatile, having a lot more of a game plan. I think that time off really helped them a lot. I think they got a lot done in terms of their communication styles and really came out in a strong way into the spring split, and it's showing dividends. It's just not enough to beat a team like Gen.G. And yes, the thing on everyone's mind, Game 3, not so close. 24 minutes, 0 kills for BFX. Sometimes you just have one of those games where you give Canyon Nidalee and Chovy gets level 16 on Rise at 21 minutes into the game, and you're just like, well, it's over. You know what I mean? This is a GG go next in every sense of the word, but BFX being in a Game 3 in the first place against Gen.G is already an accomplishment. So let's go ahead and get into it. How can I not give player of the series to Canyon? I don't even care what happened at the beginning part of this series. You can talk about the Sejuani. You can even really talk about the Xin Zhao not being all that perfect. They had to kind of scrap their way out of game number 2. They weren't exactly in a dominant position to win that one either, but when you have this kind of Nidalee game number 3, you're player of the series. This is undeniable. As much as I love Chovy, and as much as I can give him credit for being really good on the Victor in game 2, as he has been all year long, and hitting level 16 at 21 minutes on the Rise in game number 3, as much as I can give him credit for that, Canyon was the guy in game 3, and he is the player that you're going to remember from this series. You cannot give him Nidalee. I don't care. Don't bail him out, man. Raptor, You had something good going. You were incredible in Game 1 on the Naafiri. You were able to get the big pick of the patch and look really great on it. The Viego in Game 2 was still very active. You were looking to try and carry the game, which has really been the key to unlock BFX is Raptor getting back into form. But Game 3, you try to do it on Zyra, but you let Canyon have the signature sauce, and he cooks you on it. It is absolutely absurd to see what this guy can do on Nidalee. I honestly don't think it's fair. And credit to Chovy as well. It's not like Chovy played bad and doesn't deserve player of the series or anything like that, like he got it on broadcast. He was incredible, and he really was probably the most consistent member of the team across this entire series because he obliterated Vikla in the mid lane matchup, but it just wasn't enough for me. Canyon simply had to be the player of the series. Keen was awesome here on the Poppy. I think that was really the game that stood out. You cannot pick Cassante into Keen. He's always been very good as and into that champion, and Keen, kind of re-cementing himself. He had a rough winter split. It's nice to see him bounce back and play as well as he has recently. Ruler and Duro continue to be great. Duro has been exceptionally good in the spring split. I'm glad to see that all of the hyping up we did for him on this channel in the offseason was not for nothing. He is actually living up to that hype right now. Gen.G is just a well-oiled machine when they're clicking. Again, you can criticize game number 1, but what I'm going to remember is that dominant game number 3, and that's where they really locked in. But for BFX on the other side, you just took a game off of Gen.G. Certainly can't be too frustrated by that. Like, you're not going to sit there and be, angry or upset that you were able to do that. Raptor was excellent in game number 1, was truly spectacular. I think you could say similar things about Clear on the Jax, who I thought played really well, but at the end of the day, Gen.G is going to wake up eventually, and you're going to have to, pay the consequences for that. Dud of the series is easy and obvious. It's Vikla in the mid lane. He got trounced by Chovy. This was not even a remotely interesting or close matchup. And really, anyway, and it's not that that's unexpected. Like, this is how we thought this was going to go. This is likely the best mid laner in the world, taking on certainly the worst mid laner in the LCK, but one of the weaker mid laners in all of the starting regions at the current moment. And it went as you would have anticipated, even in game number 2, where things were interesting. Vikla was awful on the Sylas, and that was a big reason why they weren't in game number 2. Raptor was still at least good in game 2. If you want to point out that the Zyra was miserably bad in game number 3 and that Raptor was easily the worst in that third game, I think that that's fair. But when you take both of their losses into account, I simply have to give this to Vikla. Diablo and Kellen continued to be, whatever. They were not the focal point this series. Clear was fine. I certainly don't even have that major issue, that major of an issue with Clear, but he did kind of get gapped in game 3, as everyone did. BFX just was happy to be there. They were happy to be entering this series above 500 in terms of their game score at 6-5, and they're happy to be walking out of it at 500 at 7-7. It's still not that bad of a place to be. BFX is significantly better than I expected them to be, even with this trouncing at the end of the first day. And for Gen.G, this is the end version of what we kind of wanted to see. Of course, you don't want to see them dropping games to BFX, but this team has been dominant. They're 5-0 for a reason. They've only dropped 3 games the entire split up until this point. I can sit here and, whine and complain that they didn't end up, making it perfect, but at the end of the day, it's a minor sense of weakness for a team that has been nearly unstoppable so far. Then moving on now to day number 2, and we kick day 2 off with a 2-0, the first one of the week. It's DRX taking on Hanwha Life Esports, and HLE obliterates DRX, and it's not even as indicative as the scoreline would tell you. Like, the scoreline looks kind of neutral. It feels like DRX actually had a chance in game number 2, and you know what? They did. They absolutely had a chance in game number 2. That chance goes flying, and I mean soaring out the window the moment they decide to fight over that mid wave. What? Huh? Excuse me? I feel like I must have lost my marbles at some point. Even the LCK casters were just losing their minds on camera. It's ridiculous, the decision-making that DRX have. Not only are they truly awful in certain aspects of the game, but one of those aspects is any decision-making at all, and that's really not a great place to be. For Hanwha Life on the other side, I'm not going to say they're going to feel lucky to get out of this series as easily as they did, because they were definitely better than DRX. Even the areas that you can criticize aren't real areas of criticism, but we want to see this team be dominant. We want to see them come out and decimate a team like DRX, and that just did not happen here. So let's go ahead and get into it. Zeus is going to get my player of the series. He Flame Horizon Rich. I know it doesn't necessarily show it in the KDA. I wish I could put up CSD numbers here, but he Flame Horizon Rich in game number 2. Who didn't see this coming? The moment he locked in Nidalee, you're like, oh, Rich is the worst laner in the LCK, regardless of position, and Zeus is playing Nidalee into a Scion. Yeah, this game is over. Like, there is no way for this guy to be able to survive that set of circumstances. Zeus went to town on Rich, and again, like, I don't want to keep reiterating my statements, but these are the games that people point out to me as like, oh, see how you were wrong about Zeus, see how you have like a bad opinion about this guy as a player. This is who he is. His good games are always going to look like this. I'm not judging the player or the rating based off of his good games. I'm judging them based off of his bad ones, which he still had a couple of over the course of this split. But the good ones are just tremendous. He's the most mechanically talented top laner in the world. I don't even think that that's debatable. I wouldn't take a single other top laner in terms of raw, pure mechanics over Zeus. He can just sometimes be a little bit more on the negative end. But this was a really good series from him. I also do want to point out Delight, who I know I haven't talked about a ton in spring, but that's because I just couldn't stop talking about him in winter. He's the best support in the world. I don't even think it's really all that close. I don't think anybody really, contests him in terms of the current form in that regard. The Blitzcrank game in game number 2 was a disaster for DRX. They just couldn't help themselves. They had to play greedy. They had to play aggressive. And you know what? This is like the perfect draft to try and play into Blitzcrank because you have Sion, Skarner, and Braum to eat the Blitzcrank hooks and to just get in there. And you have an Ezreal. Like, really, it's only Victor who should ever be worried or scared about Blitzcrank throughout the entirety of this game. And yet, somehow, Blitzcrank was only hitting hooks onto UCal. It felt very funny to see how that happened towards the back half. Zeka continues to be awesome as a carry. Once again, people pretend like he's only good at melee assassins, Akali, Yone, things like that. He's good at everything. His Azir was excellent. His Ahri was even better in game number 1. Viper is really solid. Peanut is really good. He's the best Maokai of all time. Like, Hanwha Life is just really good at League of Legends, and maybe you wanted to see them be a little bit more dominant, but even in retrospect, I think it's better than the scorelines would indicate. HLE was the better team here. And then for DRX on the other side, this team is actually just bad, and they are so much worse than they were in winter. At least in winter, UCal was playing well. Like, at least you had, like, the out of just hoping that UCal could be the best player on the Rift, and I'm not saying that that was ever going to be the case against Hanwha Life or one of the better teams in the league, but at least it was something in your head that you could potentially try and feasibly see. Now, it's just not the case. UCal is not playing like that anymore, and everybody else on this team is a disaster. They're not even LCK caliber. Teddy's scoreline looks good. He was kind of useless in this series, as he almost always is. Plato was generally fine. I think those are the two players you're not necessarily as mad at, although they made some pretty major mistakes over the back half of this game. But Rich and Sponge were just awful. Rich gets Flame Horizoned in game number 2. He's going to get dud of the series because how can I give it to anybody else? Not only was this guy involved in every bad play that DRX made, but he sacrificed and gave every bit of gold over to Zeus, who took over the game on the Nidalee. It's just not good. Rich is not a good laner, and if you want to take advantage of him as a player, get a winning lane matchup and decimate it because he's not going to be able to survive. Now that lane swaps are gone, Rich's biggest weakness is back on the menu, and I think you can take advantage of it. Sponge was also horrific throughout this series. I think even worse than his scoreline would indicate. This guy has no sense of macro. Like, he has no idea how to play the map. He has gotten better in terms of his ability to stay controlled in the early game, but his late game decisions are miserable, and DRX in general is just a mess in that regard. It's not Playtech coming in. Some people might look at a new support coming in last week and see, a downturn in macro and say like, oh, Playta's the problem. But as far as I'm aware, Sponge is a primary shot caller on this team. Playta was not coming in to be that role. Maybe you need to transition it over to him because at least for now, things are not working out. DRX is significantly worse than they were in winter, and that's not a good sign. And HLE is too good to, not take advantage of that. They're going to move to 4-1. Of course, their only loss being to Gen.G. This is still one of, if not maybe the best team in the world when everything is clicking. I just want to see more agency of their own because right now it feels like they're capitalizing on mistakes more than they are creating those mistakes. And I think I would just prefer to see that from HLE. But whatever the case, whatever the reason, this is still a very nice win. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and these are the upsets that I was referring to in the intro. It's OK BRION taking on KT Rolster, and of course OK BRION ends up picking up the 2-1 series win. Of course KT ends up throwing it a little bit here and ends up losing a series that they really needed to come out and win in terms of the position that they put themselves in. This is a 1-3 team that, yes, has had a really tough schedule up until this point. I've, talked about that pretty extensively on the channel, but they need to start getting their shit into gear. They need to start locking in a little bit, and this is not the way to do that. Not only did they lose to Bro in this series, but because Hype is on loan from KT as a player for Bro, he wasn't even able to play. They had to play Bull, who they brought in specifically to play in the series against KT Rolster, and here you are losing that series anyways. And honestly, the takeaway from this for every KT fan should be the exact same, and it should be BDD either carries games for us or we lose. It does not matter. It actually is irrelevant what happens with the rest of this team. I tweeted about this after this series ended up happening, where I think I said something along the lines of like, oh, you know, KT fans promised me that getting rid of Perfect and getting rid of Dectum was immediately going to solve all their problems. And obviously, I'd been talking for weeks about how this team is broken at a fundamental level, but Casting and Paddock aren't good enough to be able to salvage this team in terms of what their expectations are. I feel really bad about this being a top 6 team right now, and for Bro, this is a cool win. Like, I'm certainly excited about it, and maybe they're able to build off of this, but, like, how much can I really read into this at the current moment? BFX has already overachieved quite a bit, and yes, DRX is really struggling right now, but this more so felt like KT running it than it did like Bro actively capitalizing on a lot of the things that they were doing wrong. So let's go ahead and get into it. Hanwha is going to get my player of the series. This was a welcome sight for a lot of different reasons. First of all, I'm sure KT fans are frustrated to see Hanwha be the best player on the Rift when they're losing to him. That's certainly not an ideal set of circumstances for KT, but also because Hanwha has not been good in 2025. Again, regardless of popular opinion, regardless of what people on Reddit and on Twitter like to tell you, like, Hanwha has been one of the worst players in the LCK, and this is the time he kind of pulls it all together, is against Cuz, who's supposed to be way better than him in a series where KT is supposed to have all this pressure. Hanwha finally has enough talent to be able to pull through against KT. That's a really bad sign for KT. It's a good sign for Hanwha, but I'm more so worried that this is a one-off. I'm really hopeful that that's not the case, but I need to see this more consistently, because once again, I hate to be a hater on him, but the tape isn't good. Like, the LCK tape so far has not been solid for him, so to see him break out and be so good in this series, I think obviously is a positive, but it's certainly a positive that I have to monitor and see if it's going to be sustainable. The one player that has really been great the entire year here for Bro is Closer in the mid lane, and I'm really happy to be able to say that, because I've been a Closer hater for most of this channel's history. In fact, all of this channel's history before this year. This is the first time where I've really been a little bit higher on his individual performances than maybe consensus is. Maybe it just took him getting off of Sandbox, getting out of that FearX organization and getting somewhere else, but he went up against BDD here, the one player on KT you have to worry about, and completely outplayed him, and that's just gigantic for Bro. If you're going to be able to do that at a semi-regular pace, that's what's going to get you top 7-ish. That's what's going to make you like the best of the rest at the bottom of the standings, which, make no mistake, like, is possible here for Bro. Morgan was really good, even with Casting playing really aggressive on the other side. Bull and Polu were really good. I would consider Bull. This was one of those circumstances where it's like, I get that Hype is, you know, really hyped up and has shown some flashes, but this performance from Bull was just as good as anything Hype has shown at the LCK level so far. Paddock obviously was pretty decent in terms of what he was able to get resource-wise. Him and Peter were not the problem, but Bro just looked good, and I think you can point to most players, but specifically the middle of the map here, the jungle mid duo, and then for KT on the other side, BDD's done of the series. Like, what else do you need me to say? If that's going to happen, this team is actually doomed. Like, there's no way for them to be able to win any sort of series as long as BDD is not carrying them, and this is really the first time where BDD has just played bad, like outwardly bad. Like, he had the Talia game in game 2, and you're like, yikes, and then he had the Galio game in game 3 where he wasn't really able to do anything, and it's just like, uh-oh, like, he just played 2 back-to-back bad games against OK BRION. Obviously, I'm not going to try to overreact to this in the same way that I'm not going to overreact to Hanwha being player of the series. I'm not trying to be reactionary here, but KT is struggling in a lot of different areas, and it might be taking its toll on BDD. Remember the last time that BDD was on a bad team in, what, 2022, 2023, on that Nongshim team that just was completely a disaster, like, in every possible way? He was really bad on that team, and it was because they didn't have any pressure, and he clearly turned his mental off. You don't want to get BDD in a situation where he's not fully invested. That's when KT starts to crumble, and so they need to start fixing this quickly. And the funny thing is, I think the rest of this team was generally fine. Paddock and Peter were certainly not the problem. Casting was solid on the top side, even if he was worse than Morgan. Cuz was the issue here, and Cuz has been bad in 2025. Again, a below average jungler, not just below average, but like a significantly below average jungler in terms of what he's been able to produce, and losing to Hanwha is a disaster for him. So a lot of things that KT need to fix. They're at 1-4 to start this split. Things are just going wrong, but as you guys know, the moment that things start to go wrong for KT and everyone starts losing hope, that's when they figure it out. So we'll see what kind of rebound they can end up doing. But for Bro, really nice win. Happy to see them be able to pick it up. It's all just about, you know, maintaining this kind of confidence. They can be the 7th or the 8th best team in the LCK. It's pretty wide open at the bottom of the standings right now, and with KT struggling at 6, who's to say that's out of the realm of possibility right now? Bro did just beat them pretty handily without their starting AD carry, so a lot to think about after this series, but kind of in a positive way. Then moving on now to day number 3, our middle day of the week here for week number 3, and another upset bouncing right off here. It's BNK FearX taking on T1, and BNK FearX pick up an absolutely ginormous victory here. Nobody saw this coming, let's be honest. Nobody predicted this one. I think we all kind of went into this with like, oh, T1's starting to figure things out. It feels like they're locking in terms of the players that they want to play. But no, they're not locking in terms of the players they want to play, because they switch out between the 280 carries in this series alone, and they end up falling to BFX. Now, I'm not saying those two things are connected, but I certainly think there is some level of a through line there, and obviously there were things that went right for T1. This wasn't some sort of decimation. Game 1 was pretty solid from them. Game 2 was decently close. Game 3 was not. Game 3 was definitely FearX favored, but the fact that this is possible in the first place for BFX just shows the kind of growth that they had. Even if T1 played the worst game that they have ever played last split, BFX was not the kind of team that was going to be able to take advantage of it. Now, you can make a strong argument that this is a top 6 team in the LCK and that you should be looking at this as a playoff team. The fact that, again, that's even in the conversation is absolutely ridiculous at the current moment. But let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the series, to me, pretty obviously, is going to go to Kellen in the support position. I say pretty obvious, but really it's between Diablo and Kellen. Both of them were really good in this series, and I think both of them did some really interesting things, but Kellen's Alistar game is really what broke this series wide open. He dominated game number 3, and of course, credit to Diablo for being able to take over on the Zeri. He was the carry, but it's once again the bot lane duo of BFX that really sets them apart. I've been, very willing to praise both of them over the course of this year. Diablo has definitely been the one who's gained a lot of the momentum and the traction and a lot of the fans, I would say, over the course of this year. But Kellen, to me, has been just as consistent, and a big reason why Diablo's been allowed to do that in the bot lane. So I want to give them both praise here, but how can you not shout Kellen out? This guy's just been excellent so far in 2025. Again, I don't want Diablo to be praised as this breakthrough 80 carry without talking about how easy Kellen has made the job for Diablo, because he really has made it a lot easier. He's been excellent this year, and me being high on Kellen continues to pay dividends. This is a guy who's been hated in the community for years for what I would consider to be no real reason other than the fact that he plays support for some of the more demanding fan bases in the world. He played it for DK, for Damwon for a long time, and that fan base is just going to be willing to find a scapegoat anywhere they can. Kellen happened to be that scapegoat, and now that he's off that team, I think he's thriving again, and it's really nice to see. I also do want to point out Vikla, because for all the faults that Vikla has as a player, he was fine in this series. He certainly survived enough against Faker for them to be able to come out here and win it. I'm not saying that he was perfect. He certainly had his own set of flaws, and Faker was really good on the other side of this. Probably the best player for T1. Owner was definitely up there as well, but Vikla certainly did his job. Raptor was feast or famine, a couple of great plays, a couple of not so great plays, but the good plays definitely outweighed the bad, and Clear was definitely the better top laner here. You want to give him a lot of credit for how he ended up playing, because he's been much better in spring. It seems like whatever kind of mental issue he was going through in winter has been resolved, but the fact that BFX can even take this series in the first place is ridiculous. This team is sitting at 3-3. They're sitting at 9-8 in terms of game score after, a pretty sizable start to the split. It's not like they've only played bad teams. This is genuinely a team that can make some noise and might be a top 6 team, and I never considered that heading into the split. And then for T1, what do you even want me to say? Like, genuinely, what words even come to mind in terms of, talking about how T1 ended up losing this? I think that there is a clinical way to break this down and an emotional way to break this down. The emotional way you're probably going to get in a lot of different areas. Smash and Gumayushi swapping in and out, this team not finding any sort of chemistry, playing against their strengths, yada, yada, yada. The clinical way is that Doran did not have a particularly good Yorick game in game number 3, a champion that we've seen succeed pretty consistently in the LPL. I say succeed. It's not necessarily always been great, but it's certainly been high priority in the LPL for a little bit, and I think you have the opportunity to take over there, but the problem is this team doesn't play around a split pusher very well. They honestly never have, and on top of that, you're drafting Yorick to split push, and then Victor, Jinx, Lulu to play for late game 5v5s. It feels like a pretty disconnected draft, all things considered, and it really did not help, and Doran got obliterated in game 2 on the Gwen. I feel pretty confident in saying that he should probably just stop playing Gwen. He's not very good at this champion, and just start playing a lot of these tanks. The Scion was on the other side there in game number 3 for BFX, but I think Doran could really thrive in that role. That being said, he was the easiest possible choice for dud of the series here because he was not very good. That being said, he's been good this split. Again, I feel like there is a lot of conflicting information about where he's been. Smash and Guma also never really found any sort of consistency here. Smash wasn't great in the early part of this series, and so Guma ends up coming in. Guma's game 3, also not great. Certainly was one of the weaker games of the series. Keria couldn't really do anything because he was on facilitators here like Lulu and Renata in the back half of the series, and I'm certainly not saying that that was a problem some, but I feel like there is a bit of a disconnect when you're trying to play through KIA and he doesn't have the playmaking potential to be able to do that. Kellen was certainly more active and was the better support in this series, which is just not good enough from T1. This is a bad loss. It puts them at 3-3. These teams have the same record right now after 6 series in the LCK. That is absolutely ridiculous, and I, for one, am just really interested to see where it goes. Can T1 bounce back next week? Because they're already done in day number 3 of week 3, and BFX is also done, but they're done in a positive way. They had a great week, all things considered. They took a game off of Gen.G, and then they took 2 more off of T1. It's like the best possible week you could ask for FearX, and there is still a lot to go off of for this team. Raptor and Clear are playing way better. Vikla had a solid series, and Diablo and Kellen are genuinely a very good bot lane 2v2. This team is actually a little bit scary right now, and I'm pretty excited to say that. But then moving on now to our second series of day number 3, and we finally got a true, real blowout here as we saw the DN Freecs taking on Dplus KIA, and DK is going to pick up the 2-0 victory. They're going to dominate this series, decimate DNF, and I can't say that this outcome is surprising, really, under any circumstances. We expected DK to be way better than DNF on the other side of this matchup, and, you know, DNF is just a disaster in basically every way. This team is not able to live up to their own standard in terms of what people thought at the beginning of the year, or even what they should be right now. Like 0-5, I think, isn't even representative of how bad they've been so far in 2025. It's really not been good. But for DK, this is a nice win. This is a nice showcase, and really, it's a coming out party for Shiwu on the top side, who is going to get my player of the series. There isn't a ton to talk about in terms of intricate gameplay here. A lot of players on DK obviously playing really well, but Shiwu was the one that really drove a lot of things forward for me. I think Lucid actually ended up getting the broadcast player of the series. I do understand why the Ivern was gorgeous in game number 2, but I think this guy is turning into a superstar very, very fast. You have to remember, it's not easy to come in as a rookie and be good in the LCK, to come in as somebody who's never played at the tier 1 level and just be good in the best region in the world, especially for a good team where, while the transition period is a little bit easier, you also have a lot more responsibility. But he's come in and been one of the best top laners in the world from day number 1. It just has clicked for this guy. Mechanically speaking, he's obviously way better than a lot of the other top laners, but the mental part of the game, he's got it. Like, he knows exactly where he's supposed to be, when he's supposed to be there. He's a great team fighter. He's just a really polished top lane player. I didn't expect him to be this good this fast, and yet here we are. He truly has been exceptional for this team, and I think it would be a disservice to call anybody else player of the series, because I do think he was pretty clearly the best player on DK, and I think he is, you know, running away with Rookie of the Year, regardless of how well someone like Diablo is playing, just because of how good he has been. I think the other players to shout out, already kind of mentioned Lucid. He was exceptionally good on the Ivern. Ivern, a champion that almost every single time it's played, it looks fantastic, but that's usually because Ivern is picked in good Ivern spots, and so you can't really be too picky, I guess, in terms of, you know, trying to nail down what that champion's strength is. I think if you're good at playing around your laners, then this is a great champion. And if you want tempo, Ivern's really good for that. But the Xin Zhao was also great in game number 1. Lucid is just fantastic. He is really breaking out in 2025. Aiming was also really good in this series. It's funny because I've said this over and over again. I was an aiming hater last year. I've been an aiming hater throughout almost all of his career, maybe with the exception of 2023 summer. That's like the one time where I'm like, he's living up to what his stats would tell you. I think he is kind of a stats merchant in that regard, but this is the perfect team for aiming. This is literally the perfect situation for him to not have to be this super proactive carry in the early game, where he can just kind of sit back and do nothing early on and then do a lot of damage in the late game, because you have so many other options. His best case scenario is that regardless of the game that he's in, he's going to be the second best option on the team, and that's what he was in this series to Shiwu. Showmaker has obviously taken a lot of that onus over the course of this past year. It's just a great situation for aiming, probably an ideal situation, and these are the types of teams where aiming can be a top 580 carry. Like, this is the type of circumstance that allows him to do the things he's really good at individually as a player. So credit to that. Of course, Showmaker only dying once was pretty good. Bulldog actually put up a pretty decent fight. On the other side, it just didn't matter. And then Barrel, still super aggressive, but everybody was winning for DK. Everything was going right for this team. Really no negatives, no notes for them in this series. And for DNF, it's just bad at this point. There's honestly nothing else left to say about this team. We've talked about the lack of synergy. We've talked about how the members of this team stylistically don't necessarily fit with each other, and how all of them are playing some of the worst league they ever had in their career. But it just continues to get reiterated over and over again. And once again, I want to say this. Like, if you're not Lehens or like Delight or Keria or like one of the best best supports in the world on a team that can dominate, don't pick Elise. Certainly don't pick Caitlyn Elise and try to snowball a game out of control against a Dplus KIA team that's really good at like stopping games, making them go a lot slower and getting into late game team fights. I just think this is hubris at this point. If you draft this, you deserve to get done of the series, and that's exactly what Life is getting. Life has been really bad once again here in the LCK. It's really unfortunate because this guy had such a good career up until 2023 where the wheels fell off for him on Hanwha Life when that team was really expected to be great and they just weren't. Life was a big reason why that team was a bit of a letdown. He goes over to the LPL and is a big playmaker, playing things like Rumble support really regularly last year and kind of overachieving a lot on FPX. He gets another shot here in the LCK because it really was at the time just 2023 where he underperformed, and he has been bad once again this year. I don't know what teams are seeing in scrims that, you know, let them pick Elise and Caitlyn and Azir in the same team comp and just hope and pray that it works out. But whatever it is, like, stop trying it. It's not going to work. You absolutely have to be the better team in a game like this to even be playable. Dudu obviously got kind of destroyed on the top side. Shiwu was definitely better. He's been hit or miss, certainly not the top-end top laner that I think he could have been at his high level. I just don't think he's quite there anymore. Pioshik's been the worst jungler in the LCK, maybe with the exception of Hambak, but Hambak's doing really well now, as we saw earlier this week, and Pioshik might be taking that number 10 spot on. Bulldog is not good enough to play at this level, even though he wasn't a problem, and Berserker is hard stuck on a DNF team that is not good enough to be able to let him do anything. So overall, it's just a disaster. 0-5 is not even selling this team as short as they deserve to be sold. It's not good for them, but for DK, it's a really nice 2-0 win. It's a nice way to set up the beginning part of your week, I'd say, in day number 3, and it's a really nice showcase that the young players that kind of came through this system for DK are the ones that actually can carry them into the future. But then moving on now to day number 4, and we kick day 4 off with another kind of dominant victory here between Gen.G and OK BRION, with of course Gen.G absolutely decimating the competition. And I hate to say it, I hate to be a glazer, I really do, because sometimes it feels like I'm a little bit overeager about this player, and then he goes international, and you know, he doesn't win worlds, and yada yada yada. I can't watch Chovy play League of Legends and not call him the best player in the world. I just can't do it. There's nobody who does what this guy does. To me, it is so abundantly clear that he is head and shoulders above everyone else in the world with what he's capable of doing, as consistently as he's capable of doing it. And once again, he's gonna get a player of the series here. He's once again running away with MVP in the LCK right now. Obviously, it's still pretty early on. It's just week number 3, but he's super far ahead of everybody else to start off this split. He's on the best team in the league. He's the number 1 guy, easily on the best team in the league, and he just continues to be the focal point. Chovy is unreal. You can't give him Ahri. First and foremost, I sit here and I say that, I'm like, oh, you can't give him Ahri, but there's like 5 or 6 champs you just can't give Chovy. It's pretty unfair in that regard, but even on things like Victor, like his team fighting on Victor has been the best in the world. There's no one even close to it so far in 2025. That's how good Chovy has been. Closer has been the best player for Bro, and it's been super consistent as a mid laner, easily a player that I've really been impressed by so far in 2025, and Chovy was so much better than him, it actually was ridiculous. It was unfair to watch. He really is just at that level right now. He absorbed so much pressure for Gen.G that it allowed Ruler and Keen to do whatever they wanted throughout a lot of, especially game number 2. And in that time, he didn't die a single time. He went deathless throughout this entire series. It's like a genuine cheat code. Nobody is doing what Chovy is doing right now in the LCK, and he's on pace to be one of the greatest of all time, like top 2 or top 3, if he continues to play like this. Obviously, you'd love to see a world championship, but people put players like Uzi in that conversation. They don't got any world championships. Chovy's just been unreal. He's been absolutely tremendous for Gen.G, and he continues to be GOAT behavior, right? Like to live up to that hype. Ruler and Duro were also really good in this series. I think somehow, some way that's going to go a bit undervalued because of how good Chovy was, but Ruler continues to be excellent for this team. I'm glad I continued to have confidence in him. Duro is obviously broken out almost entirely here for Gen.G. He has cemented himself as one of the best supports in the world. In terms of his gameplay, Keen was awesome, way better than Morgan, completely decimated that top lane matchup, and Canyon was more of a facilitator in this series, which is a positive just to know that he can do it at a relatively good level. So overall, nice victory for Gen.G, and not the best best way to parlay a really nice win for Bro earlier on in the week against KT Rolster. Of course, he didn't expect to be able to go toe-to-toe with Gen.G, and I'm not going to fault them too much for this loss, but this was not close in any way. Nobody on the team actually was able to survive. Hype was probably the one player who did the best, but even then, like, Hype's KDAs mostly because the rest of the team was the one dying instead of him, not necessarily because he was the one making a lot of big plays on something like the Ashe with those arrows. You can kind of go player by player and talk about where they went wrong in this series, but Polu is going to get my dud of the series in the support position. Sometimes it's just really hard to play support when the rest of your team is losing, and I get that, but sometimes you're playing Rel and you just like full engage with no one else around you and you die, and it's like, all right, man, you know, I can only excuse so much coming out of the support position. The Alistar game certainly wasn't much better. I already am not a fan at all of Zeri plus Engager. I think that is just a way to make Zeri a lot weaker and to not set her up particularly easily. I think you kind of need an Enchanter to play that champion at the current moment, and they didn't want to go for it, and it ended up really biting them in that game number one because they had nobody who could carry the game with any resources. So Polu's going to get done of the series. I don't think he played particularly well, but again, you can point to most players on the team here. Morgan was awful on the top side, got completely obliterated by Keen. Sion is usually pretty stable, not so much in game number two. Certainly the Rumble wasn't very good. And then Hambach went kind of back to being Hambach. He was at least active on the map. He was trying to do things, but it's not like he ever had an ounce of pressure in this series. It just wasn't very good for Bro. There aren't really a lot of positives to talk about, but it's against Gen.G. You're more so going to be pulling the KT series from this week rather than anything that Gen.G did, and I think that that's a positive. And then for Gen.G on the other side, obviously Chovy is incredible, but this whole team is incredible. They're 6-0 for a reason. They're sitting at 12-3. This team has been unreal so far in the spring split. Everything we wanted them to be at the beginning of the year and then some. I loved their offseason, picking up Ruler from the LPL when he was kind of, you know, buy low there on him a little bit, and certainly a buy low on a player in Duro that I was super high on last year. It seems like all of that has come to fruition for Gen.G, and they're re-cementing themselves as the team to beat, not only in the LCK, but in the world. Then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and it's another kind of blowout, but one in a more encouraging way. It's NS RedForce taking on Hanwha Life Esports, and HLE is going to pick up the 2-0 win. I say encouraging because even though NS is getting absolutely obliterated here, and I really like when NS succeeds, it's mostly just Hanwha Life being excellent, and not so much NS really running it down or making gigantic mistakes. Obviously, they were not perfect in this series, and HLE was incredibly good, but this more so felt like an HLE win than it did like NS just completely letting themselves down. Now, that being said, there were a couple of players on NS that did not play particularly well, and we will talk about that as we continue to go on, but this is a big plus for Hanwha Life. This was supposed to be a team that came into the spring split as world beaters. They went through the gauntlet in the LCK in the winter split in terms of just going through the playoffs and, you know, having to really earn their spot at the top of the LCK, and then they dominate first stand. Nobody even comes close to being able to contest them at that tournament, and that really goes to show just how good HLE actually is. The problem is they came back and they immediately lost to Gen.G, and they didn't just lose, they got destroyed by Gen.G. Now, they've bounced back relatively well from that, but there have been some inconsistencies. I think a lot of the concerns, though, are washed away by the end of this series. We already were starting to hype up players like Zeka, who have been phenomenal recently. Peanut, I think, has been really good in the spring split. Delight has continued to be the best support in the world, but this week it's all about Zeus on the top side, who's going to get yet another player of the series. Right now, he is the main player contesting Chovy for MVP in terms of the early front running of that award in the LCK, in my opinion, and he's doing a really good job to really establish himself in that role. The Rumble and the Jax in this series were just unreal. Nongshim and Kingen in particular just did not have an answer. They didn't have a way to be able to shut him down or really stop him in any feasible way. That Jax in particular in game 2 was dominant. Kingen wanted to go for something a little bit more out there in terms of the things he wanted to counter with. You know, the Anivia top in game 2, which is certainly an interesting pick. We've seen it a couple of times this year, not only by Kingen, but by some players over in the LPL as well. This has certainly not been unpickable throughout 2025, but it did not work out in game number 2. I'll tell you that. That Anivia was not useful, was not going to be relevant at any point in that game, and it really was a big detriment to Nongshim, but Zeus took full control of that. This was just a good week overall for him. Again, he's going to be rather hit or miss in terms of which version of him shows up in the regular season. You can really reliably count on the best version of him showing up in the playoffs, which is always why he's been a very valuable player for the teams he's been on in T1, probably regretting their decision quite a bit right now. Not that I think it was their decision. They definitely wanted Zeus back, but Zeus choosing Hanwha Life and kind of showing that, yeah, I held all the cards. I'm the best top laner in the LCK. and you wanted to have me. Every team is going to want to try and have a player of my caliber, and he definitely reasserted that. I want to shout out Zeka, though. I think he's going to go a little bit under the radar for how good he was in this series, if only because Zeus and maybe even to an extent like Viper and Peanut are going to be taking more of the headlines, but to me, Zeka was definitely the second best player on the team in this series. It felt like he is really starting to, just cement himself as one of the best players in the world. This guy has almost no weakness at this point. Typically speaking, he used to be a player that really struggled if he didn't get a lead early. He wasn't always the most consistent from a game-to-game basis. He has just grown into the pinnacle of one of the best mid laners in the world. He can just do everything at such a high level. Azir has always been a champion he's very good at, but the Aurora here in Game 2 is also very impressive. So really great stuff from the solo lane duo here on HLE. But of course, it's not like the rest of the team let them down. These are two sub 28-minute wins, one of them in 25 minutes. And so, yeah, you could say it was pretty dominant. Peanut was way better than Gideon in terms of establishing tempo and pressure, as you would expect. In this matchup, Viper was basically untouchable, and there was a ginormous 80 carry gap in this series, and Lehens tried to get, greedy, tried to get cocky, pick the Elise. I swear, I'm serious, this thing's gotta have, a 20% win rate in a major region right now. Something absolutely horrendous. This champion never wins. I don't understand what people are seeing in scrims that make them pick Elise. Every single time I see this champion when we're doing these graphics, I get actually annoyed, genuinely frustrated in real life, because you have to be trolling to pick this champion. I said Lehens was the only player allowed to play it. He is allowed to play it. That doesn't mean he should play it. Kalista Elise is not what you should pick into one of the best teams in the world. It's just not going to work out, and Viper really punished them for that. So overall, HLE looking really excellent. This is still one of the best teams in the world, and I think you can make the argument that they still could be the best team in the world. Their one actual best of loss in this split is to Gen.G, and who knows, anything can happen in the playoffs if they get another shot. But for Nongshim on the other side, they just don't have the firepower to compete with a team that's actually trying to win worlds like HLE is. At the current moment, I think the two players you're really calling out in a negative way, first off, Kingin, who was the easiest choice possible for dead of the series here. Zeus kind of stomped all over his grave throughout a lot of this series. Even Zeka was starting to get in on the fun against his former world's winning teammate. Kingin's counter picks didn't work out. The Anivia wasn't great in Game 2. Even the Jace was not particularly good in Game 1, but the Game 1 draft is awful just in every way. For Nongshim, it's a fireable draft, in my opinion, once you get into Fury. Everything else in this draft is just an absolute disaster, but Kingin was, probably gameplay-wise, the biggest problem here for Nongshim, and that's definitely not ideal. He's not been as hot the past couple of weeks. He was excellent in the winter split for this team, and I thought he started off spring well, but, week 2, week 3, not great so far, so I'm hoping to see him turn that around. Jiwoo continues to really struggle down in the bot lane. He was nowhere near what Viper was in this series. Not that he's expected to be, but it is a bit concerning for me. Lehens kind of trolled him this series. Again, the Elise, the Blitzcrank, it's just not something I want to see against Hanwha Life. Maybe against other teams you can justify this, but not against HLE in the form that they're in right now. Lehens actually was a gigantic negative to the team that he's not maybe going to get called out for because he's Lehens. Calyx was fine. I even think Gideon theoretically was fine. He should have done more in game number 1 in particular on the Nefiri, but he didn't, and that's all right. It is what it is. Nongshim got destroyed by HLE. They moved to 500 here. It's not the worst place in the world for them to be. 7-7 in terms of a game score is not bad. This is still the team to beat in terms of the rest right now because top 4 feels so decided, but HLE is not only in that top 4, they could be leading that top 4 in terms of what they actually are as a team. They're just ridiculously talented, and they're in really good form, and they continue to get better. It feels like they've bounced back after kind of being a little bit tired at the beginning of Winter Split, and I expect them to continue this good run. But that's going to bring us to our final day of action here in the LCK in week number 3, and we kicked off day 5 with a matchup between Dplus KIA and DRX, where DK is going to pick up the win, as we would have expected, but boy, was this a lot closer than it probably should have been. There were some positive traits, I would say, in the beginning of this series for DRX. DK, unfortunately for DRX fans, definitely came to play at the end, though. They started leveling up, they figured out what they wanted to do, and they really started popping off. This is a carry duo series for Showmaker and Aiming, where it really felt like winter all over again, with both of them popping off and Lucid being this fantastic facilitator, Beryl being essentially bait in every single one of these fights moving forward, and Shiwoo just being really great as that third carry for the team, somebody who can really facilitate side lanes and, set up a lot of these 5v5 fights that they want to take. DRX had no real answer to the macro part of this, which they're really bad at. Again, I want to reiterate, their macro is probably the worst in the LCK. It's certainly up there for worst in the LCK. It's hard to know what DNF's macro is because they never get to the point where they can actually use it, but this was a bad series from DRX at the end. There were some encouraging traits, though, at the beginning, so let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is pretty obviously going to go to Showmaker in the mid lane. I didn't have to think about this one too much. He was pretty exceptional across all three of these games, including game number 1 on the Ahri, where he was probably doing the most amount of work, but really, it's the Taliyah in game 2, it's the Azir in game 3 that really kind of separated him. Yukal was not good at all in this series, especially in that third game, and we'll go ahead and talk about that. He was useless to end out this series as we continued to go along. Showmaker just got these gigantic leads in the mid lane and never really looked back. He was super proactive, especially in game number 2, but the damage he was able to output in game 3 was obviously terrific. This is a pretty classic Showmaker performance. I'm just glad to be able to see that Winter was not an outlier, that he can still be one of the best mid laners in the world as long as he's given the opportunity. Again, I was excited for that. Don't distract from the fact that he did steal Aiming's Penta in game number 3, but Aiming continues to step up. Again, I think this is such a perfect spot for Aiming in his current form. I didn't love the fit for Aiming last year on the same team, even with a lot of the same players, because I think he was asked to do a lot more on the team last year than he will be this year. Shiwu coming in, I think, has really changed the dynamic of the team a lot. I think Lucid stepping up and being one of the better facilitative junglers in the world, Showmaker being a primary carry option coming out of the mid lane. Again, Aiming just doesn't have to be the guy for the team, and when you take resources out of Aiming's hands, ironically enough, he starts performing better, not because he himself is getting more resources and, just plays better with lower resources or whatever, but because he functions best when he can just play isolated, when he can slow down the pace of the game early and then team fight late. He is just an optimal version of what Teddy is on the other side for DRX. I always complain about this archetype of player at a high level, but I do think it can still be very useful for a team like DK if you have superstars surrounding him, which they do, and Aiming has been excellent across this year. Everything you could ask for from him in his role. Easily the best weak side AD carry in the world, in my opinion, at the current moment. He has just been really excellent in that, secondary carry type of mentality and attitude. Then you've got Lucid, who just continues to be awesome in the jungle. The Pantheon in game number 3 was fun to watch, but he can carry a lot more than he gets credit for on these picks. I know I think of him more as a facilitative type of player, but when he goes into Sponge, who's a jungler that's way worse than him, who's playing Sejuani and Maokai, he takes advantage of that tempo loss and does really well in that regard. Beryl is very aggressive. He's definitely, re-unlocked that part of his brain since he's come back to Damwon, but it's not a bad thing. He's playing better than he has in many years. In my opinion, he's never played better outside of Damwon than he has on Damwon. That includes when he won Worlds in 2022. I just think that there's something different about Beryl playing with Showmaker, and it's clear for all to see. This was just another really great series from DK, and they continue to look solid. I would have loved if they didn't drop game number 1. This team can still be a bit of a fiesta every once in a while, but for the most part, it's a good thing. And then for DRX on the other side, if Yukal's not winning, this team isn't winning. They're like a worse version of KT Rolster. I've talked about that all year long, where KT is a team that really needs BDD to do something in the mid lane, really needs him to stabilize and win his lane so that he can take that pressure and move it elsewhere, because no other lane has consistently been able to win. Not top lane, regardless of who's playing there, and not bot lane, regardless of who's playing there. That's DRX, except Yukal isn't as good as BDD. Yukal is really good, but BDD is a better player, and unfortunately for DRX, they're running into the same problem here, that now they're, mid laner that has carried them in so many instances that did so well for them in the winter split. He's run out of gas, and he isn't able to do it at as high of a level as he was able to do it a couple of months ago, and that means the team is just falling off the map. This Yone ended up doing less damage than the Maokai in game number 3. It's completely unacceptable to see Yukal play the way that he is. I would give him some slack because, man, the responsibility he has on this team is ridiculously high, because Teddy is not a carry. He's not going to be a player that can be the number 1 option on a team and actually win games, because that's just never happened in his career. Sponge is certainly not that. Rich has been getting destroyed in lane now that lane swaps are gone. Plata has had a rough transition back into the LCK. It's all on Yukal's shoulders, and it is kind of breaking him a little bit, but it's just kind of unfortunate to see that, he leaves Thunder Talk, that team starts performing better than they have in a long time with a worse mid laner that is playing worse, objectively playing worse, just because they seem to figure out their communication style a bit better. He comes over here to DRX, he tries his best to carry this team, but things aren't working out here either, and now his performances are starting to suffer. It's just really unfortunate, but, poor Yukal. He's going to get done of the series. He was awful in game 3. I just hope he can turn it around, because he's too fun of a player when he's playing well to kind of be talked about like this. I also think it's worth pointing out that Plata has just not been good. Once again, good job picking Elise. Good job letting DK right back into the series. I genuinely, I want to make this as clear as possible, because I mean it when I say this. I get real life upset when I see teams pick Elise. I genuinely sit there and have to take breaths out of the game, because I'm just why do you want to lose? lose? Like, why do you want to not win games? What is wrong with you? Why would you ever do this over and over and over and over and over again? Like, it is just so repeatable. I just can't wrap my mind around playing this champion. I legitimately probably got like a 15% win rate in pro play. There is no excuse anymore. None. This champion is not as strong as she was 3 months ago, and she's not performing well. What is the advantage? Like, genuinely nothing. And shout out to Plata for picking Elise. I almost gave him dead of the series just because he picked the champion. If you draft this, if you are a coach in the LCK or the LPL or the LTA North or the LEC, any of these regions, and you draft Elise, you deserve to lose and be fired and whatever, right? Like, it's mismanagement, genuinely mismanagement if you pick this champion. I'm done. I'm so done with Elise support, and I hope I've made that abundantly clear, but it's not like Plata played any better. Like, the Braum game in Game 3 wasn't great when he was off of the Elise. Like, Sponge wasn't great. He got out-jungled for sure by Lucid in terms of tempo. Rich continues to not have any pressure on the top side. Teddy is just a complete nothing burger down in the bot lane. He's going to look good on the stats and the KDA. He does not impact wins and losses. DRX is not good. This is a bottom 2 team right now in the LCK, and they're kind of bailed out by the fact that DNF is so bad because they're playing like the worst team in the LCK would. It's just disastrous to see where they've landed. And for DK, it's obviously a really nice win for them. I would have loved to see it be a bit more consistent, but Showmaker is back in form. Aiming feels like he's in a great spot. Beryl and Lucid look great. Shiwu was amazing already earlier on in the week. Everything is great for them. This is still a team that can compete to win the LCK, and you got to be happy about that at least. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in week number 3, and it's a good one near the bottom of the standings between KT Rolster and the DN Freecs, and this is the get-right series that KT needed. It felt like Bro and DNF, this was going to be the week for them to go 2-0, for them to hit that 3-4 record, or that 3-3 record, and kind of get themselves back into contention near the top 6. Fortunately, it didn't happen earlier in the week against Bro, but they do still get their revenge game here against DNF. Dectum is back in the starting lineup for KT. This ended up really working out for them, but it's against DNF, so how much do you even really want to try and say? It looks like Dectum is a better player than Paddock. I'm not entirely surprised by that. Dectum certainly is a more consistent player than Paddock. It's funny because it's not the first time that Paddock was replacing Dectum, and it is not the first time that Dectum, came back and looked like the better player when they got more opportunities, and so, kind of funny to see the DRX history repeat itself, but this is the exact series they needed. They needed to go up against DNF, who can't buy a win right now, who's just an absolute disaster everywhere on the Rift, and just kind of take them down. And for DNF, like, what else is there to say? I've given up on this team entirely. They're easily the worst team in the LCK, and they basically have nothing good going for them. They remind me so much of that Nongshim team with BDD back in the day that just could not buy a win, and it's really disappointing, but let's go ahead and talk about it. KT, obviously, on the winning side, gets the player of the series, and that, to me, is pretty obviously going to go to Peter in the support position. I'm a big fan of Peter. I do believe that he is a player that can succeed at this level. I think this is a pretty bad situation, all things considered, for him, because BDD is just not able to do everything, and their jungler has not been consistent at all. They have a bot lane that's constantly being swapped in and out between Paddock and Dectum. It's just been a difficult spot for a support to come in and be effective, but Peter, I think, has been solid enough for the team, and he's been the biggest upgrade. I think Wei was easily the biggest problem for this team in winter, and even with Dectum playing as bad as he was, and I think Peter coming in does stabilize quite a bit. He's a playmaker. He can go out there and, really disrupt a lot of what Pioshik or what Life want to do in terms of aggressive engages, and I do think that works out for KT, but I do want to give a big shout out to Cuz. I've been very, very critical of Cuz this year because, quite frankly, he's been bad. I'm not going to try and sugarcoat it just because Cuz has been good in the past. This guy has not been good at all in 2025. He's a big reason why KT are at 1-4, but Pioshik's been worse, and Cuz came out and picked the Fiddlesticks in game number 2 and made it work, so you got to be excited at least a little bit about that. Dectum came in and was really solid again in the bot lane here. The Kalista, the Ezreal, both of them looking very good. Berserker had an incredible game number 1 on the Xayah. Couldn't quite carry that momentum over into game 2 on the Jhin, but Dectum was awesome, again, specifically on that Ezreal, and BDD deserves the win, man. Like, this guy's been put through everything on this roster across this year. We talked about UCal really feeling the weight of the burden of carrying a team. I'm sure BDD is in a very similar position where he knows he has to do everything, and so going up against Bulldog where he can just be fine and let the rest of the team do stuff, that's a really big positive. But man, did KT need this. They needed a series where they could just come out and win against a team that they are way better than, and that's exactly what this was. Hopefully this inspires some level of confidence for them moving forward, because they've just not been able to find any sort of consistency this year. And then for DNF on the other side, I'm willing to say it. Pioshik's the worst jungler in the LCK. I really do mean it when I say this guy's got to get replaced. Like, I'm done with Pioshik. I'm giving up on him as a player. I do not think he is an LCK caliber jungler at this point. He wasn't particularly good or consistent last year, and it's gotten way way, way worse. I mean, this guy got the OP jungler of the patch in Naafiri in game number 2 and ran it. Got completely shut down by Fiddlesticks on the other side. And I get that you could maybe make the argument that that's a counter matchup. Poppy support ended up coming out for Peter, which is obviously really good into something like Naafiri, but you've got to be relevant. Every single player who has played this champion has looked somewhat relevant, except for Pyosik. This guy just can't do anything. He's actually useless, and he deserves dud of the series. Life continues to be the antithesis of what his name actually is because he dies all the time. He had another miserable week here. He's going to be in the running for dud of the week once again for the entirety of the LCK because Pyosik and Life just have been awful for this team. Life, I'm willing to excuse a bit because, again, I do think the 2v2 is fine. It's just everything after that that has been a disaster, and part of that is Pyosik, part of that is Bulldog being an absolute nothing in the mid lane, but part of it is Life just overextending and definitely not playing with the rest of his team. It's not a good look, and that's unfortunately kind of taking itself out on Berserker, who's playing great. That Xayah game was unbelievably good in game number 1. He's actually been a really good AD carry for this team. He's just mega stuck here. Dudu was also not the problem on the top side. In fact, I think you could make a really strong argument he was the better top laner in this series. It just doesn't matter. If Pyosik, Bulldog, and Life are going to be as negative as they have been for DNF, this team is going to continue to be the 10th best team in the LCK, and there's nothing that either Dudu or Berserker are going to be able to do about it. But like I said, nice win for KT. Just getting on the board is a good thing. Getting a win in a situation coming off of that loss to Bro, where you can at least start to build some momentum. I hope that they can lock in on a starting 5 to just build some confidence and start building some communication, because swapping these players in and out isn't going to be helping anybody. I get that they're desperate, but they've got to figure it out soon. So hopefully this is the 5 they use going forward, because at least for this series, it actually did look very good. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCK week number 3 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated standings after 3 weeks of action. I want to just remind people, I'm very sorry for this getting out later than I wanted it to. There's just been a lot going on. Every single video is pushed back a day this week. I hope you can understand, but to kind of add some context, I have not seen the results of anything that have happened in week number 4. I have no idea how these power rankings are going to adjust based on that. This is entirely based off of week number 3. Again, I haven't even seen the results of the games in week number 4, and so we'll go ahead and go over my power rankings after week number 3. I apologize if this is already out of date as we go forward, but staying at number 1, of course, is Gen.G, but HLE is a lot hotter on their tail than I think they have been recently at number 2, but DK is going to jump up to number 3. They were pretty good this week, but mostly this is T1 falling down to number 4. DK was pretty consistent, but T1 is just a team that I don't really believe in the regular season right now. We all know they're going to figure things out, get the 3 or the 4 seed going to Worlds, and then win the entire tournament. It's just how that organization ends up going, but to do that, they need to be ranked the number 3rd or 4th team in my power rankings, and so that's where they land. They are clearly the most volatile right now of the top 4. But everybody in the top 4 is still leaps and bounds better than everybody else. Nongshim is going to stay at number 5, but a new number 6 is going to be here. It's BNK FearX. They really are the 6th best team in the league right now in terms of their production. Do I guarantee that this is going to last? No. I think there's a real shot that a team like KT Rolster ends up retaking that spot once they figure out how they want to play League of Legends, but at least for now, BFX, as they're constructed, is better. They are playing better in multiple different areas. Raptor is playing like Summer Raptor from last year. You got players like Diablo and Kellen that continue to pop off after a really nice winter split. They're building something there on BFX, and I do think it's worth, kind of putting them into the top 6. Usually I'm a little bit nervous to do this for teams that I don't fully believe in, but I don't believe in KT. This has more to do with KT just actually being bad and having problems that I think are difficult to fix rather than BFX being perfect. But KT is not a top 6 team in their current configuration. They're going to drop to number 7, and some people might drop them even lower after that loss to Bro. I think that that's fair. For now, I still believe that they are most likely to be able to turn things around out of all the teams near the bottom of the standings, but they're going to have to do so. They're at a deficit now to BFX. Even if they're better than BFX marginally towards the back half of the split, they put themselves a little bit behind them because they lost here in week number 3 to OK BRION. So they really need to start pushing forward. But again, if this ended up being a top 6 team, I'm not going to be surprised at all. Honestly, I kind of regret moving them as I'm talking this out now, but I'm going to keep it. They're going to stay at number 7. And then we do have a swap of 8 and 9. DRX is clearly a bottom 2 team, so they move down to number 9, and that means Bro moves up to number 8. It was a nice win over KT, and they do have opportunities to be able to take advantage of teams who make mistakes, and that's exactly what, a lot of these middle-of-the-table teams are going to do, so they're going to move up to 8. I don't think they're a playoff team, but I do think that they are at least competitive, more so than DRX and DNF at the bottom of the power rankings. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comment section below, and let me know if I've already, gotten a little bit ahead of the gun on some of these decisions, because, we've already gotten too full days of week 4. But let's go ahead and move into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 3. Player of the week was really obvious. It is going to be Zeus in the top lane here for Hanwha Life. I didn't really think about this. Chovy did give him a good run for his money for most of the week, and he was excellent, but Zeus was the standout player this week, not only on the Jax in particular in that Nongshim series in game number 2, but, you know, the scoreline, the KDA doesn't necessarily do the Nidalee game justice in game 2 against DRX. He Flame Horizoned Rich, got this gigantic lead, and was very influential towards his team's win in that regard. And it's not like the Rumble game was a throwaway game. He still was very good in that one for HLE in game number 1. So Zeus is going to get my player of the week. In my honorable mentions, Chovy, the mid laner for Gen.G. Do I even really need to explain it? He's the best player in the world. Most weeks he's going to be in contention for player of the week. And then Showmaker, the mid laner for Dplus KIA, another player who's just been absolutely sensational so far in 2025. That team is built perfectly around him, and he's able to do all the things he does really well. So Showmaker and Chovy are my honorable mentions, and Zeus is my player of the week. And then dud of the week, already going to a player for the second time in 3 weeks. It's Life, the support for DNF. DNF is a disaster. They've gotten dud of the week all 3 weeks. Last week it was Doo-Doo, I believe, and in week 1, obviously, it was Life. It's Life again here in week 3. Things are just not working out for DNF in the way that they are currently constructed, is the word I'm looking for. Life has been bad for this team. He's way too far forward. Even if his laning stats are fine and Berserker's laning stats are fine, it does not represent the mid or the late game problems that he's running into individually as a player. I definitely considered Pioshik and even someone like Jiwoo, the AD carry for Nongshim, for dud of the week here, but I ended up landing on Life. So he's going to get my dud of the week, and Zeus is going to get my player of the week. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We'll be posting about the LTA North and the LEC later on in the week, but of course, we'll be covering the LCK for the rest of this split, and we also cover the LPL every single week on this channel. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.